Hello and welcome to the Ori Spotlight Podcast. We are welcoming Matthew Hewitt today, who is the Vice President and Technical Officer of Cell and Gene Therapy and Biologics at Charles River Labs. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be here.
Appreciate you taking time during what's supposed to be a day off today, I think for both of us, to chat, but it's great to catch up. I know you've been a lot of travel, and congratulations on, I think, a recent announcement coming out of your team for your partnership with Vertex and CRISPR to manufacture their brand new product for sickle cell. That's exciting.
Yeah, we're very excited, very focused on continuing to work on that program and getting it into the commercial space. The team, both Vertex, CRISPR, and Charles River pulled together to pass back-to-back audits for the FDA and European Medicines Agency through HPRA, the Irish authority. And so we're really excited. Now the work begins, of course, and we're super focused on getting these therapies to as many patients as quickly as possible.
It's amazing how hard we have to fight to get to the starting line. And now the fun starts, right, as we try and get patients treated. So
yeah.
We'll cover much more on that later, but wanted to start with you, if that's okay. A little bit about your background. I know you've been in the field for quite a while, despite being such a young man. You have quite a lot of experience in cell and gene. Wanted you to, just if you could, relay some of that background experience and what brought you to your position at Charles River.
Right. No, happy to. So I began life, as many of us did in cell therapy anyway, as an immunologist, and was working primarily in T-cell and B-cell interactions in the context of allergy and asthma. My dissertation work focused on that. I then moved into neural control of airway disease during my postdoc and looking at how inflammation affects the nerves that innervate the lungs and ultimately the rest of the body, looking at how things like cough, pertussis infection, and then other sensing mechanisms within the lung influenced the way that the lung functions. Then moved off into a bit of a tangent from immunology and did some work in upper airway innervation as well as sleep apnea, developing models for small molecule in that, for both central sleep apnea as well as obstructive sleep apnea. That was a fascinating area. I know way too much about sleep apnea and sleep in general. Just did a lot of sleep scoring in rats, as well as survival surgeries. We were working with some of the first inductive charging systems that were out there at the time. Moved from there into the advanced therapeutic space, where I was running the immunology group at the University of Pennsylvania within the gene therapy program, and of course the person I was ultimately reporting to and working with was Jim Wilson. And so while I was there, we were working and significantly contributing to approximately 36 different AAV gene therapy programs, around 30 of which were in clinical trial in various phases in the U.S. and other jurisdictions. That was obviously a huge crash course into advanced therapeutics at a time when we were 2 years before the first approval in cell therapy, and then certainly in gene therapy as well with Luxturna. We did a tremendous amount of work there in helping companies figure out what are the things that were needed in order to get into clinic, and then ultimately, once they were in clinic, what would be required of them to move from cohort to cohort and phase to phase. I think it was a very interesting time as well with the regulators. The regulators were still finding their own way in this as well. And so we were very collaborative with them and helping them think through the various challenges that we may face together as we were advancing these programs. Of course, and the overall effort for everybody was to get these therapies potentially curative to as many patients as possible. And many times we were working in rare and ultra rare indications where there were little to no other therapeutic options for these folks. I became very interested in cell therapy while at Penn, doing some work with the PD group, with several of the cell therapy groups, and ultimately made the shift to industry, where I was running a discovery through clinical nomination program focused on the tumor microenvironment in both blood as well as in solid tumor indications. We also use synthetic biology to influence the activity of cells. Moved from there to Lonza, where I led a team that was focused on launching the cocoon manufacturing technology. And so there learned a lot about various things around technology I was leading the biology, engineering, and software groups, also leading all the clinical development. I was working very closely with colleagues in that BU across the different functions to ensure that we could get that system into the market and essentially have it be available to manufacture product for patients. We were quite successful at that. The Coon is still in the market. It's doing quite well, being used all over the world for manufacturing, hopefully commercially soon, depending on the trial outcome. Left Lonza to join Charles River, who had recently acquired some CDMO assets and brought in to work with the executive and senior management team to integrate that into the portfolio and understand how to best leverage the existing CRO, preclinical CRO business along with the testing business to create what is I would say, the most comprehensive end-to-end advanced therapeutics portfolio in the space at the moment. And as part of that, as you mentioned, we do have one announcement we just made about being one of the commercial manufacturers for Casgevy. We were also manufacturing a separate commercial cell therapy at that site as well. So we've commercialized two therapies. The Casgevy was autologous. The other one that we commercialized is allogeneic. So we're doing both in the same facility. And then we have various other programs that are trending towards commercialization within our viral vector CDMO, and then we produce plasmids as well.
Yeah, Matt, just want to hear a bit more about, as you mentioned, I think it was through the acquisition of Cognate that Charles River really got into, CDMO, cell therapy manufacturing in a big way, historically being, in different parts of healthcare, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about how Charles River sees the landscape, kind of the vision for CGT, kind of where it fits in the overall broader company portfolio?
Yes, I think we're fully committed to the advanced therapeutic space. We see it as a different paradigm compared to some of the other modalities out there. Specifically when we talk about small molecule, we have a beautiful slide for this, of course, because we have PowerPoints to kill everybody. But we talk about small molecule as being an extremely important first step in the space, where we're essentially using chemistry to transiently affect biology. And then we talk about biologics being something where we're using biology to manufacture a fragment of biology, in this case, like monoclonal antibodies, bispecifics, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then those therapeutics, again, are once administered, are transiently affecting biology. Maybe less transiently so than a small molecule, but ultimately it does go away. And then I think what we're talking about now with advanced therapeutics and somewhat, lumping the nucleic acid side in with this, we're using biology to manufacture biology and then administering this biology to patients in a way that many times is permanently changing the patient's physiology many times, as well as the outcome of the patient. And we're less talking about maintenance therapies, and we're talking about curative therapies. We're starting to use the C word. This has major effects on the way I believe that you start to view manufacturing, because your manufacturing considerations are going to be far different. We have various graphs around this that show how we have this laid out. One is for the curative, is colloquially we call it the Sovaldi curve, after Kite's Sovaldi treatment for hepatitis, which has 98% cure rate. And initially they were producing very, very large amounts of revenue there because they were working through the backlog. And then as they worked through that backlog, that revenue dropped as quickly as it went up. And then they are essentially treating the incidence of the disease. And so, that's very different than a maintenance therapy where you have a ramp, then you have a stable state for a certain amount of time, depending on market penetration, and then ultimately it falls off from the introduction of biosimilars in response to IP expiration or something else next gen along. So we view it as a very different paradigm. We believe it absolutely so far has changed the way that we are treating a lot of different indications. And so we believe that this has significant benefit to the patients. We also believe that our existing portfolio on the preclinical side, coupled with the testing side, gives us a unique advantage and able to offer clients and developers a more streamlined, fast way to get products not only to clinic, but also ultimately support them in commercial. And I think that's where we see it. I mean, the goal of us is not to, I mean, certainly there's a goal for us to meet clients' needs, but I think a big goal for us is to, as part of that, to ensure that our clients are moving through the process of getting to clinic and ultimately commercial in a cost-effective manner that eliminates as many steps as we can without compromising product quality and or safety.
It's a really interesting point you raised, which I want to touch on earlier, but it's really at what point, and what is the role of companies like Charles River or even a company like Ori? Where do we play with developers? Developers obviously have tremendous expertise with their molecules, their targets, their modalities, but may not be experts yet in manufacturing. If they're small biotechs, maybe may not be experts in technology. It used to be that the CDMO world was a lot of kind of fee for service. People come in, they ask you to do something, you do it over a period of time, over the course of the contract. Maybe that relationship continues, maybe it doesn't. I get the feeling that the model's evolving, certainly in advanced therapies. It has become much more of a partnership that is intended to go over the long term. Tell me a little bit about that evolution. I think it'd be interesting for our listeners to hear more about that.
Sure. I mean, I think it depends on the modality, of course. I would say that they're all partnerships and at some level, of course, because once you start producing anything, whether it's a plasmid, a vector, or a cell therapy at a particular CDMO site, especially when we start talking about things like clinical and certainly commercial, there are hurdles to start switching sites, switching vendors.
Yeah.
And so that's why we see a lot of companies being very careful and deliberate about the way that they choose those. I would say that some are, in that case, a little bit more transactional just in their nature, just in the way that you approach them and deal with them. At the plasmid level, I think it's something where we have a very well defined platform. Here at Charles River, we have 2 lines that we have over 20 years experience with in fermentation for plasmids. Those are very, very well set up. You bring the plasmid in, we transfect it into some bacteria, we produce it, we run through downstream, and voila, we have a plasmid. You might need plasmid every once in a while, I guess, depending on the scale at which we're producing it and the rate at which you're consuming it. But generally, that plasmid is going to be used as a raw material for, say, a viral vector. And a viral vector still a little bit transactional because many times, in the beginning there, we were doing a lot of one-off manufacturing runs. So you would, as Jason, as a therapeutic developer, you would bring me your GOI, your AAV, or your Lenti, and we would one at a time develop that in PD and then go on. We've since moved on to operationalizing that, and that's not just here, but elsewhere as well, where we have platforms for manufacturing Lenti and AAV that leverage the travel knowledge that we've gained over the years. And then we start to standardize this so that we can do it much more efficiently. And because of that, it does become a bit more transactional in nature. Again, it is fully a partnership for us, but just speaking about the actual mechanics of this. You make a batch of vector, and again, you're gone for a while before you come back. In cell therapy, it is very much a marriage because we are working almost day in and day out, many times day in and day out together. And so we have to be very comfortable with each other. There has to be some baseline level of trust that the actions in which we're doing can be executed on. A lot of that depends upon certainly the facilities that we have, but many times the staff. And that's where we put a big focus on, is on the technical staff. I myself and you as well and others have a lot of experience in this space, but a lot of therapies in the clinic and now, several in commercial. But to be honest, I'm not the one who is directly running the manufacturing teams anymore, and I'm not the one who is gowning into the suites. So, we really put an emphasis on having the correct, management at those sites, leaders of those teams, and the teams themselves in place so that we can properly execute. There was a question about how do you gain trust with your CDMO? I say, we're kind of working on trust every single day. There's not a day with any client that I'm sitting back and going, oh, they 100% trust us. I mean, there is some level of skepticism, which is fine. I think that's relatively normal. But ultimately, we have to execute. And we do start to see that there is some movement away in late stage and even commercial programs from typical fee for service into other models like performance-based pricing, et cetera. And I think that it's not just us. I mean, I think that's as a field we're moving towards that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that in most of those, though, where you move to performance-based pricing, I would just say that there is not only a stick there to punish a CDMO if they happen to make mistakes, but there will also have to be a carrot for the CDMO. If you consistently deliver, then there has to be, some, gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, for us.
Because you're taking a risk as well.
Yeah, there's not a true incentive to move to that type of pricing.
Yeah, exactly. If it's only a net negative potentially, then there's no real incentive to share some of the risk.
Right.
I love what you said about trust, and I think it is critical to any relationship, of course. And what I hear you saying, which we've seen as well with our early access partners, is we're consulting with them on their process and saying, well, tell us, why do you do this step, and why does that happen, and what do you get out of it, and is it necessary, and what if we did this instead, or what if we move that over here? Or it's quite a consultative process, which I think is a little bit unusual, or it's a little bit, maybe it's indicative of where the industry is versus where it has been. Technology vendors were, called vendors for a reason. You'd sort of come, you'd drop technology off, they'd use it or they wouldn't use it. We're seeing much more engagement with our partners at a very kind of deep level to say, we're the experts in the technology, you're the experts in your process. How do we bring both of those expertise together to have a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of scenario? And then if you bring a CDMO partner in like yourselves, who has a different set of expertise, which we don't have, and maybe the partner company doesn't have, that there's some real synergies there to be had.
Right. I mean, I think it's a very good question, and it's something that we've talked about before, as well as with others, saying that we need to understand our roles and responsibilities in the space. Otherwise, things will get clouded and much more complicated.
Yeah.
Therapeutic developers, and I mean, what we run into here is a bit of, we cannot be a master of all trade. There's just no way to do it. And I think that's the thing that we have to realize, that the developers need to focus on developing the therapeutics. Folks like you and your team at Ori need to focus on developing the technology that helps enable us to manufacture at scale and efficiently, in an efficient way. And then ultimately the CDMOs have to actually execute on that vision, because we have the knowledge and how to do this in GMP, to how to do it at scale. We also have the knowledge and how to organize the teams in which to do this. And that's not just manufacturing. That's a lot of other functions that come with this, within QC, and there's multiple functions within QC that have to align well, and then ultimately QA. And if you try to do it all, then there's a question of how do you properly resource all of that? And that's a problem I've run into in the past in industry. As I mentioned, I was designing synthetic switches, synthetic biology to control cells. And we would get a question all the time about, well, what are you? I mean, are you a cell therapy company that's developing therapeutics, or are you a technology platform? Because if you're both, how do you properly resource both of those, activities? So I do think we need to really focus on, breaking out these roles and responsibilities, and then because ultimately we will execute on it better. I think your point around the developers is a really good one. I think it relates back to trust in general, no matter if you're moving into a new system like Ori or into a CDMO. The reason I say that is a lot of these processes are de novo designed, from a very open manual sense. And the advantage to having those open manual processes is that at any given time, those researchers can go in and pull a sample. And they can see exactly what good.
Yeah, they can do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, scientists by nature, including myself, I mean, we're skeptical beings. Hopefully skeptical of our own data as well. We don't fall in love with it. But the point being is that by being skeptical, I don't actually always trust everything is doing what I think it's doing. And I think with the advent of newer systems like Ori, the evolution of everything else, and the more experience that researchers get on these systems, I mean, they have to trust that the system is producing cells. And we would be able to start trying to move away from things like a bunch of in-process sampling events, or even one in-process sampling event. That was one thing that we actually always talked about quite a bit, or we do talk about quite a bit in general, is anytime you do an in-process sampling event, let's say with T cells, You have to resuspend them into what is hopefully a representative
Homogeneous sample, yeah.
right? And then you take a sample. You can't put those cells back in once they're out.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever capability they may have had to proliferate is now gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically when you're resuspending the cells in that nature, you're putting them back into lag phase, and then they have to resettle and then go back into the growth phase.
Yes.
So the ideal scenario is that we just never have to pull those samples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Generally, in-process sampling events are not decision-making for product. But what that requires is a trust that when you put in the starting material, you transduce it and you grow it, that when it comes out, you have a product. Now, at the moment, we're a little bit uncomfortable with that because we don't yet, I think, have the full depth of experience that we would like, and we just want to ensure that we can start preconditioning a patient before we pull this off so we don't have a failure, and then we have a preconditioned patient with no therapy in the case of autologous. So I think we'll get there, but it's going to require newer systems like Ori's and others out there to get us to that point.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points I just reflect on to say, the various players like enabling technology companies or CMOs or therapy developers, we all have an important role to play. And deciding where the lines are drawn is critically important. I get asked the question all the time, is Ori going to become a CDMO? Are you a CDMO? I say, no, we don't have the expertise. We're developing technology. I got a lot of biologists. I got a lot of engineers. We do that really well. There's a whole bunch of stuff that a CDMO does that we don't do well. And you need to be able to choose best of breed partners like Charles River or others who know what they're doing. And so we are enabling you and them to do what you guys need to do at scale in a way that makes sense for you, enabling your business and for you to demonstrate that expertise into the process.
I mean, I think the other thing that would be concerning about that structure, if I were an investor potentially looking in, is you would essentially have two businesses.
Yeah, very different businesses.
Your one business on the platform side would be wholly dependent on your CDMO.
Mm-hmm.
CDMOs, by their nature, are in principle supposed to be technology agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
That would mean that your CDMO is not necessarily dependent upon your technology platform.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would be concerned about if your CDMO started to, the OpEx related to your CDMO started to be a large consumer of cash,
mm-hmm.
that there would be a lot of temptation and pressure to de-emphasize your technology platform or your core focus and just do typical CDMO activities. And that would be a little bit unfortunate. I think you would also, I would say people in the field in general like options. They don't like being told that you can only use
That's right.
Ori CDMO. And I think that's another consideration you have to look at. All CDMOs have different considerations around pricing. Hopefully we're all generally in the same ballpark, but there are some that are more expensive than others. And, that's going to be another one. So a client might come in and say, or they might have an existing CDMO that they don't want to move from, but they want to use your technology. Exactly. So it's you set yourself up for a lot of complicated conversations, I'd say.
Yeah, it just goes back to the point around flexibility, right? People want flexibility, technologies they use, the cells they use, the processes they use, the partners they partner with. And the more you restrict that, the harder it gets, to convince people you're the right partner to partner with, but also just to let them do their job, because their job's hard enough as it is without restricting their options around what resources they have at their disposal. I wanted to ask you a kind of a related question to say, 2023 has been an interesting year for the industry. I mean, we had kind of, certainly from a funding perspective, we had a boom 20 and 21. 22 has been challenging. 23 has been challenging from a funding perspective. We're continuing to see approvals. We've seen, I think, 8 approvals so far this year. The science continues to advance. We are seeing those products coming to market, at least being approved, getting regulatory approval. I've got 2 questions really for you. One is, what have we learned in 2023? What is the kind of takeaway that you've, said kind of, wow, that's really come clear to me this year, maybe more so than it was in the past? And what do you expect in 2024? I mean, no one, if I could predict what's going to happen with the investment space, I'd be a hedge fund trader, not a startup CEO. But, I wouldn't be surprised to see, interest rates stabilize, hopefully, and maybe, late in 24, back half of 24, maybe investment picks up a bit. But ultimately, we're all in this to try and get these products to patients. And I'm wondering, we've got 3 or 4 approvals. First TIL approvals are coming up. I think we've got Adaptimmune and Iovance both in the queue, kind of early 24.
Right.
I think Autolus has got another CD19 CAR for hematological tumors also queued up for 24. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned about those products making it to patients. That I'm worried that we haven't cracked the nut for open access yet. So, what have you learned in 23 that you're taking away into 24, and what's your outlook for next year?
I don't want to discount the CD19 therapies that we have to date. I do think those therapies still have room to grow, as evidenced by Yescarta's significant increase in revenue, and they're
Yes.
for about $2 billion this year. But I was far more interested from the perspective of scaling and patient population size in the multiple myeloma therapies. Myeloma really is more monolithic in terms of the antigen distribution. 85+% express BCMA, which is what we're targeting with the Carvecti. And if that's the case, then there is a very large patient population out there. So if we're talking about what do we need to scale, like what is our dress rehearsal for larger solid tumor indications, that's it. And I think what we've seen so far is several pain points, one of which is scalability of manufacturing in general. I also think that we've seen obviously pain points for viral vector, not to pick on anybody, but one of those has really struggled with viral vector availability. And so, I think what that points to is twofold. One is ensuring you have the proper supply chain in place for your drug substance, in this case a viral vector, to feed into your manufacturing program. I think what I've seen, on the other side of this is the current commercial therapy. The current commercial therapies are all produced in-house for the most part, and at least in CAR T. And I think that, frankly, I think that's proven to be kind of a misstep on the industry's part. There are multiple interviews now in surveys saying that only about maybe 2 to 3 patients that are eligible for these therapies actually receive them, and the median wait time is 6 months.
Yeah.
And the industry in general has spent billions of dollars to build out this capacity to serve 20 to 25% of the market.
Yeah.
And the uptake on the cell therapies does not seem to be based on market penetration or patient adoption, but it's related to how many doses we can actually produce. So I think we have to get a little more realistic in the way that we're going to do this. And I think it has to be through partnerships with CDMOs. That's just the reality, I think. And I think it's the reality in virtually every other modality that exists out there.
Yeah.
I have been encouraged by the new emergence of technologies like Ori and others to help solve this problem, because it's going to be a problem that likely requires multiple solutions. There's probably not going to be a single, as nice as that would be and clean. So I think that's one thing that I've been seeing this year. I think the other thing that was very significant for me this year was seeing that FDA is finally publicly talking about decentralized manufacturing. I think that is the only way we're going to get this to work for a lot of this. If we do centralized manufacturing, the biggest complaint against decentralized that people come up with is logistics. How are we going to logistically source if you start doing the math on logistics touches just for therapies, just for starting material and product, and we've done a couple of these calculations for 40,000 doses per year, you're looking at over 200 logistic touches per day just for starting material and product. That's not including any of the other consumables that would have to be brought in. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of logistics touches or thousands. And I think we have to be realistic about, if we do build something like that, then all you will do if you move to an automated system is you will shift your people from manufacturing to logistics and warehouse. Okay. And that may not and probably won't have a significant cost benefit. So we have to look to start to move these out into, closer to the patient, reduce logistics required, spread out and stratify our talent pools in different areas, and then move to a way that we can do not only decentralized manufacturing, but also parallel processing of that manufacturing, different products and different patients, because that's going to be a way to really increase the utilization of a lot of these decentralized manufacturing spokes. I will say I have been certainly nudging the regulators, including FDA, on this about, I think it's great we're talking about this, but let's move away from it, like kind of in principle, how we're going to run it, and let's think about how we're actually going to run it, and figure out, how we're going to do this. And I think that honestly, the CDMOs are an important point to this. I think the academic centers are an important stakeholder in this. And I also think folks like Ori and the other technology developers are an important stakeholder in this. And the three of us have to come together. I have been trying to understand with the regulators what's the appropriate avenue to engage with them on this, because a lot of the avenues that have been created to this point are focused on the more therapeutic development side.
Yeah.
You interact with us when your therapy is at X, Y, and Z. There are opportunities for us as CDMOs and technology developers to interact with the regulators, but 99% of the time, it's in the context of an existing dossier that's already been submitted and opened, and there's very little wiggle room for us to talk about new things.
Yeah.
So I think as a field, we need to come together and try to figure out a way to work with the regulators on a different, in a different way that allows us to start mapping this out, because this entire thing is built on risk. Everything's built on risk. Regulators love to tell you to write risk assessments, but ultimately they also have to approve those risk assessments on inspection, and people are generally risk averse. So we'll stick to a slow evolution on this if we don't get some guidance on what's acceptable.
100%. I mean, it does seem a bit more of a kind of, at least right now, an academic exercise. It's more of a thought exercise than it is really trying to get to the brass tacks, like how will we get this done? Like, is this the right thing to do? How do we get it done? In what cases, in what instances? And I think your point is an interesting one, because today's CDMO model, taking place in 10, 20, 30 centers of excellence around the US, let's say, probably doesn't work in its existing format. It relies on, we need to move the ball forward on technology. We need to move the ball forward on regulatory innovation. Like, a lot of these pieces have to come together, and it's, you see academics, leaders of centers, we're partnered with MD Anderson with their CTMC joint venture, Mayo Clinic, MSK, Fred Hutch, like all of these leading centers have capability and interest in partnering with therapy developers to run clinical trials, do manufacturing maybe, but nobody really knows how it's going to work. And if, as in our industry, we've been in this a long time, we know no one wants to be first, everyone wants to be second. And so, sitting at the table with the regulator and mapping it out to say, like, well, if we do that, then what do we need to be concerned about? And if we did this to mitigate that risk, how does that work? And how do you think about this challenge? And it has to be more of, they have to be in the sausage making a little bit with us, because otherwise we're going to have to take a punt and guess at it, and we're going to get it wrong, and that slows things down. But you intimated this, and I wanted to ask you about it. It's great that you've joined Ori's scientific advisory board. Excited to have you as part of that group moving into 2024. We're going to greatly appreciate your expertise alongside people like Bruce Thompson, who you know very well, and others who've joined the board alongside you. But you alluded also to the work you're doing advising the FDA and other organizations like maybe ARM or others. I'm curious, kind of, you seem to have a lot of connectivity within the industry, and what kind of questions are you being asked? Like, what are the topics of debate? We talked about distributed as one, I'd call it maybe multi-site manufacturing. People call it point of care, and I think that scares the heck out of everyone, that you've got some patient, connected to a machine in the hospital room, which is very, very far away. But, what kinds of things are you involved in that would be of interest to the broader audience?
The manufacturing one is certainly a big one, and work with ARM, ISCT, sit on several committees for ISCT, workforce development, commercialization, and others.
Yep.
and then an arm on the gene therapy advisory board for them. So we discuss all these topics. A lot of them are really focused around, and I think again it's important for the different stakeholders, because the academics are going to have certainly a very valid insight into how these are run at early phase and on the clinical side many times. But I think they, in a lot of the top institutions, that's where they've classically, done their work, is in that early phase, and then they push them out of into the real world or into the big real world of industry, and then we are taking that and operationalizing it and making it appropriate for inspection. It's not that I don't think that academia can get there. I think they could with the effort that the rest of us have put in. I do have some concerns about what that would do to our access to clinical at that point, because ultimately I think they would end up being more of a commercial organization. A lot of people are asking right now kind of about, scalability. For about 18 months, everybody was super into allo. And this is shown by, I was on team autologous on the autologous versus allogeneic debate at the ICT meeting in Paris this year. And that was an interesting event, and it was good. It was fun. We had a good time. But I think that allo in its current iteration has shown, and there are some questions around durability for those patients, and I think ultimately that's what's going to decide what gets through. I think that if we can move to this allo future that a lot of people would like to do, then it would solve a lot of our problems. But ultimately, again, I come back to, does it work? And does it work? We have a literal poster child for autologous right now, right? That has been cancer-free for 13 years. So I'd say, this is what it's all about. And people have said this in somewhat articulate and inarticulate ways, but hopefully I'm more articulate than not, to say that I share everybody's concern around the costs. And that's another thing that comes up routinely. For me, though, I would have a tough time, and I think everybody would, hopefully, telling people that I can't treat your son, daughter, mother, father because it's too expensive. That's not a winning thing. And I would say the other, but actually upstream of that is we actually need a therapy before we can start talking about price. And let's be clear that everybody loves to compare us to biologics and monoclonals. Monoclonals were completely and insanely expensive for 10 years before we figured out how to actually manufacture them. And my message is we are working on this, and this will get better. And that's what we tell people. Again, I look at, when do we actually start developing a lot of these systems that we're seeing now, including Ori. I believe your launch was in 2018, if I'm not
even further. Yeah, even further back. Right? The original initial IP was filed in 2016. So yeah, we've been working on it for a while.
For the first approvals, but probably as we were starting to head towards it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people didn't get into this space around this type of technology development until close to or after those approvals.
Exactly.
Because why else would you invest in something that nobody was sure if it was going to be a durable field? And there were a lot of conversations about that. So, we hear a lot about cost. I hear a lot about standardization, and I do think we need to standardize around the edges. So things like patient administration, I think all the clinical stuff we need to start to standardize. Leukopak collection, hopefully standardize. That seems to be low-hanging fruit. More recent concerns are around some of the announcements that the FDA has made around, the CAR-Ts and potential, and I would say potential link to T-cell lymphomas. We've not seen any true evidence to date. There has been one patient in Australia that looks like there was a CAR-positive T-cell lymphoma that was presented at ASH. But from the abstract and from the conversations had, this looks to be a pre-existing condition that was in the apheresis material. So I think we need to look at it, and there's some other, I think, interesting questions to come out of this. But I think that we need to keep in context that the patients we're treating, all of their prior lines of therapy, virtually all of them are immunogenic in and of themselves, including chemo, which is very immunogenic. And if you look in FAERS, the AE response system that they're quoting for a lot of these cases, the preconditioning regimens that we use for cell therapy patients have a very similar incidence of T-cell lymphomas as what we're seeing in CAR-T. And that's not to say, that's in no way to say that that's a causative link. But what we are saying is that this is a very complicated, issue that we need to unravel, and we can't ignore it by any means, but we also can't necessarily come into patients that are sometimes multiple therapies deep, potentially multiple SCTs, and say, well, it's the CAR. I think that's the skepticism on many people's side. And I would say if you talk to the KOLs, I think they're all relatively in lockstep that this is not a concern given the prevalence that we're seeing. But, we have to convince the markets as well, right?
Yeah.
And have to convince the best investors. So that's one thing that a lot of people were asking about. The solid tumor ones, as you highlighted from Iovance and Adaptimmune, everybody is very excited about that. We want to finally see that get over the finish line. Those have not come without their issues themselves, but I think it will be a huge validator in the industry that we can address solid tumors. And that's going to be, a big step forward for us. But I mean, a lot of this is around manufacturing, around cost, around certainly money. I think the space certainly got a bit exuberant during those 2 years that you talked about. And if you look at the increase in funding that came during those 2 years, I mean, it was always going to be a stretch that we were going to be able to keep up with that growth. And I think what happened there as well, and people talk about this all the time, is talent. During those 2 years, we really stretched talent to its limit. And we were talking about this actually back in 2021, even 2022, that, potentially some contraction of the number of developers may actually be a net positive because it will redistribute the talent to some of the stronger players and then give them the means that they need to get over the finish line and into commercial. And this goes for cell therapy. This goes for gene therapy as well.
Yes.
I think we're starting to see a little bit of this in the nucleic acid space. There's a ton of promise here. We just need the right talent in the right places, and we need the right programs and the right technologies.
Wide range of topics there. We could probably spend a couple more hours on. What I wanted to focus on specifically is your view on the role of technology in trying to solve some of these problems. As you know, at Ori, we're working to bring to the market next year in 2024 a closed automated manufacturing platform, really to solve some of the key challenges you just highlighted. So increasing throughput, increasing kind of reliability, repeatability of processes, and dramatically reducing costs. This is a first step towards, can we actually make autologous therapies at scale? It's the kind of first tip of the spear. And to do this, we need a whole new set of technologies, and not just from Ori, from other players as well. Generally, we know that biopharma is relatively slow to adopt, relatively risk averse. One of the things when you're talking about standards, I was thinking about, digital, sort of digitizing batch records and just the transmission of information throughout a process would be awesome, to be able to start there. Because then if you have that data in a digital format, you can start to do amazing things with it, through analytics and really understanding what it means and improving processes and all these other things. Adaptive control and processes is possible then. What is your view, both on why, is it that we haven't had the right technologies yet, or is it that why isn't the industry adopting technology at scale? And then what's needed, from your, what's going to unlock the door from your perspective, on the digital technology side that's really going to move the needle in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think in digital, and this is something that we talked a lot about too, where, I always ask the question, how often were people actually running like biologics processes, the same ones over and over? The thing is, when you're in 20,000 liters, there's a certain cadence that you have to run, but it takes a long time to run a 20K process, right? So we really didn't have the need to move into a lot of electronic systems because we just weren't doing the throughput, right? Now we are. So again, I usually start the clock around that 2016, 2017 timeframe, and I think we've come a long way in 6 to 7 years. But things that are, I think there's a combination of things. I mean, for new technologies, a lot of it is tied to where is this product coming from. If it's coming from academia is developing it in a way that they are used to, which is generally, pretty open and manual, simple. Couple that with the mad push and rush of therapeutic developers and investors to get products in the clinic. And you have a recipe there for non-adoption of, the best technologies, right? Because you're just trying to get to a value inflection point. Does it work? And then maybe I'll think about this later. And we've done surveys on this in the past, and that's what a plurality of people say. And I say a plurality because we asked a lot of people, like, when would you actually change to automation? Because there's no question that we need more digital, more automation. The question is when do you implement it? And when we looked at this, about 30-ish% were saying they would implement it at the time several years ago, right around COVID. They would say 30-ish%, 35% said I would do this before I would enter clinic. So about a third. The other 2/3 would implement it after phase 1 or after phase 2 or beyond. And so again, that speaks to the fact that the key point is to get to clinic. So I think, though, what we've done is started to work with, I think, first of all, that just the price pressures that we're talking about have made themselves evident. So full stop there. I think what that's done is also, in parallel, started to have investors think about what is an actual business viable commercial process. And so I think that's where you're going to get really some change on the pharma side and the biotech side, because they're just not going to fund things that they don't feel are going to be successful and profitable at commercial if they make it. So I think that is pushing a lot of people. I do think that is having an effect on the academic side as well, because academics traditionally look to spin things out and fund things that are going to be attractive for someone else to acquire. So they're starting to pick up that as well. I think the last one is going to have to be on the regulatory side. Coming back to that, I mean, it's a point that I've made one of the recent, when I was on a panel of national academies, saying that we should just implement parallel processing for different products, different patients in the same suite, assuming we have the proper closed system processing and analytics in place at any level. I don't care where it is, because even at clinical, you could vastly reduce the price per product clinically if you did that. You would also provide a massive carrot for people to move into closed systems, because it would be a lot cheaper for them. They know if they do that upfront investment, it would be a lot cheaper for them downstream at clinical. Now, of course, the next part is digital. And we have kind of struggled with this a good bit, I think, because for a variety of reasons. I've worked with embedded cloud, separate non-embedded systems. And what we kind of prefer, if you look at traditional IT infrastructure, is not embedded and not cloud. We want a separate laptop attached to the system, because my IT can come in, put our own security software on it, and assure it's secure to our standards. To your point, Jason, we should be standardizing a good bit of this. We should be saying, this is the minimum requirement that we're going to do. And I can tell you right now, on our side, I mean, hopefully that gives everybody comfort, is what I'm trying to say. But on our side as well, I have said to our IT teams, we are going to be dealing with increasing levels of embedded software going forward. And this is not just in CDMO, not just in manufacturing QC, in testing. There's going to be a lot of other areas of life where we're going to have to deal with embedded software. So let's figure out how to do it now, right? Because, we need to be able to do this in an efficient manner. I think that's, once we can get through that, in a large sense, I think a lot of these digital systems are going to fall into place. Connectivity is always key. That's going to be another area where we're still trying to figure out what makes sense, right? Can you do it directly? That would be ideal. If not, because of certain requirements around the software compliance, then maybe we set up some middleware that allows things to get dumped somewhere, picked up by another system, and then moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's going to be about orchestration and communication of these digital systems, because it's going to be hard to build a master of all there as well.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point there, just to say that, I think technology is absolutely an enabler to higher quality, higher throughput, and lower cost. We know that in every other aspect of our lives. Let's put biopharma manufacturing aside for a minute. All these other aspects of our lives, we carry, mobile phones that have all the computing power of, all the knowledge in human history in our pocket, and the types of things that we've automated now, even in highly regulated industries like financial services or energy. Those lessons have been learned, and we need to apply them. And what scares me is your description, which I think is absolutely apt, which is this has been an issue that people kick down the road. That's something to worry about in a year's time or 2 years' time or post phase 2. But we've seen that approach end us up where we are now, where we've got products that we can't make in nearly enough volume to get to the number of patients that need them. And so what I've been banging on about quite a lot recently, I forget exactly the term you used. I've been calling it commercial viability. Like, commercial viability has become a new benchmark that early programs that are preclinical need to be able to demonstrate to their investors before they're going to get invested in. And everyone needs to be concerned about this issue. And we need to pressure investors. We need to, because just to your point, it used to be a rush to the clinic. First in man, get that proof point, get your Series A out of the way. You can raise your 100 million on that proof point. But now the FDA is putting guidance out to say you shouldn't be monkeying too much with your manufacturing process once you're in the clinic. That's the first step. And the second step is, we know that if you wait too long, then it becomes too late and you can't actually make the change. And you've seen lots of people either try and fail or say it's too late, we're just going to go forward with what we've got, and then have products that have cost of goods that are very high, they have variability and high failure rates and all these other things. So we're pushing very hard, and it's on us, people like Ori, enabling technology providers, to make these products accessible. These platforms need to be accessible for academia. We know they have budget constraints. We know they have ability to, challenges adopting technology, but you have to adopt early. You have to adopt at R&D, PD scale, because otherwise it's always going to be tomorrow's problem until it's too late and you're developing to a dead end. And we've seen that over and over again now. And that's what I worry about for this next generation in 2024 that's being approved. What's their manufacturing process going to look like? How are they going to be able to manufacture at scale? You've got Iovance TIL product. TILs are notoriously hard to make, just given the nature of those therapies, for melanoma, which is like 125,000 patients a year. It's a massive indication, by far the largest we've ever tried to tackle. These are problems that have to be addressed today, and it starts with investors, that you said, and it starts with academia.
Yeah, and I mean, your point on the patient population is the apt one, because you look at the size of melanoma versus, say, multiple myeloma, and melanoma is about 2.5-fold, minimum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe 3. Yeah, exactly.
Than multiple myeloma. So, you start treating, let's say you get 20% market penetration, like we're talking about now. I mean, you're still talking 25,000 doses a year.
And which is likely to do 250. At this rate.
We treated in the last 5 years.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So it's a daunting problem, and I think that, we're getting better with it, but I think we have, we have to have I think some of us believe we have to have the problem to then get to the solution. Whereas, I think software, if you talk to software engineers, and then you talk to, I think sometimes investors, because I think you said this before, investors they're not specialists, they're generalists, and they don't care what you're actually trying to do. They just want to know what's the problem you're going to solve. Mm-hmm. And then with software people, they say, don't tell me the problem, tell me the solution. And I think we're starting to move towards this latter type of thinking, where we move away from, oh my gosh, I've got to produce 25,000 doses per year, to, okay, I need to produce 25,000 doses per year. How do I do that? And I think the key, in addition to digital, the digital stacks are certainly extremely important. I think the technology is probably going to be the first step. So systems like Ori, because ultimately what we first need to do is make a system, because you can have closed processing that is not automated, okay? And you can have closed processing that is automated but is not scalable. And that last one always gets left out as scalable, because if I need 2 meters of space for each individual system that I'm doing, then I still need a massive amount of space.
Yes.
And I'm still going
lots
to
of
need
people.
lots of people. And so what we need to do is close, automate, and make it scalable. The closed makes it so that you need lower classification clean room space. Automated makes it so you need less people. The other part about automated that is left out sometimes is that if you automate correctly, you need less people and you need less highly trained people.
Yes.
You don't need bachelors.
Yeah.
You need high schoolers.
Technician level. Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, I mean, that the URS that we originally developed when I was at Lonza was so that a 16-year-old could use the Cocoon.
Yeah.
And that should be our goal. That should be our goal, because there's a much larger pool of paid people out there that can do it. And if you look at where our highest turnover is in this industry, it's in manufacturing. And so there are two ways to really train people. Now, I have a boss. She loves to give me educational books every year, and they're great. And one of the first one she gave me was from an MIT economist called The Good Job Strategy. And in that, she talks about there are two ways to train your people. One is you certainly want to keep your people for as long as possible, because they learn all your processes. They gain a lot of tribal knowledge about what you're doing and how to more efficiently work, right? So there's a lot of knowledge that gets stored up there. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. But she also admits that if you have a high churn, high turnover, if you're in a high turnover industry, then the way to mitigate that is to develop a very robust training protocol so that you can basically swap people in and out as needed. And that's what technology like Ori is going to allow us to do. We're going to be able to get people in that are trained correctly, have the proper on-the-job training. But at the same time, if they leave for whatever reason, we can swap somebody else in pretty quickly, and they can still do that in a safe and effective manner. And the only way you get there is by automation technology. You cannot do this in, open manual processes. It just does not work that way.
No. And that's part of the point that I've been making to the team at Ori for 5 years is, we've all seen a baby toddler pick up an iPhone, sweep to the side and start, click open an app and start playing a game. Like, it has to be intuitive. It has to be easy. Right. It shouldn't ever require, a PhD in immunology to operate this equipment. You need to be able to, it has to be so simple I can use it. Or, some high school graduate out there who's not been trained. And that's part of the benefit of automation. That's part of the benefit of these advanced systems. But that's becoming table stakes very quickly. I think, because we know how hard, no matter how good your system is, if it requires a bunch of PhDs to run it, there just aren't enough of them. There are not enough of those people to do the volume of activity we need. So it has to be done this way. It's the only answer that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the process of the product has to go. Yeah. It's got to go.
Yeah.
I mean, that may have served us well in the early days, but we now are in a position where we have to produce 25,000, 30,000 of these per year.
Yeah.
You cannot do that with the processes product. It's just not scalable.
Now, we were talking about the role of technology, which I think you and I both agree is going to play a massive role in the future of this industry. Certainly as we scale, things like autologous therapy, it has to come into play even earlier and earlier in this process development and also commercial manufacturing. Give me your view, as you look out on the horizon, 3 to 5 years out, what does success look like? When we look back from 5 years from now and we're looking back on, through 2023, where we are at the end of 2023 now, what will we have accomplished? What are the things that you think will measure our success as an industry?
I mean, I think one of the things that I would like to see in general is something move, closer or to frontline. I think that's one of my key ones, is just from the therapeutic perspective. I mean, I saw a good stat that you all put out at Ori the other week, which is that of all of the patients that were treated commercially, 30% were this year. And I think that speaks to the fact that we are continuing to ramp.
Yeah.
What I would like to see is within the next 2 to 3 years is that we're treating 15,000, 17,000 patients a year. So essentially the number that took us, 3 to 5 years to treat, we're doing every year now.
Yes.
I think that's going to be a key milestone. I think that's going to show that this is a viable business. I think we need to do some more work around the viral vector side. I think that's always going to be a little bit of a pain point for us. I hope to see that we're going to see some more. I mean, maybe I'm saying this selfishly but I hope we see some more gene editing actually come to market. I do think that the thing that is holding that space back to some degree is the complicated IP landscape that is sitting in front of any therapeutic developer that wants to go forward with it. I hope we see some allogeneic therapies coming as well, because again, this can't be just autologous. The autologous, I think it's autologous and allogeneic. It's for me never been autologous or allogeneic. I think there will be use cases for both. I remain somewhat skeptical at the moment, but I've been wrong before, and I will be wrong again about allo's application in solid tumors. I would also like to see us move away from donor material for allo therapies and more towards iPSCs, because it's getting increasingly difficult given the slate of testing that's required to define donors and keep donors. Yeah, and I mean, it's something that would eliminate a lot of that pain point is moving to more cell-banked approaches like iPSCs. And I'm hopeful we will do that. But I think that in the near term, I want us to be able to scale manufacturing appropriately so we don't have patients waiting for 6 months. They're not being given bridging therapies, whatever they might be, in order to get them to a point where they can still therapeutically benefit from a CAR T therapy. We need to get there, and I know we can, because I'm not the only one that's doing this. I mean, it's you, it's Ori, it's others. We're doing this collectively, and I think that's a critical thing. No one of us can do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the comment you made around accessibility, it's the incredible amount of effort and time and money and just human endeavor that goes into making one of these therapeutics, and then seeing them essentially treat a handful of patients only, and knowing that there's thousands of others that could benefit. It's just an untenable outcome. It's just not where the industry needs to be. And I
think we need to think about on the clinical side what that does to people too, because we're also, really for us, it's sad, okay, but we're also not the ones.
It's not our exactly. It's not us, or it's not our family.
Who gets the therapy? And I mean, if you want to go get a real sense of that, that's not patient, but is also fairly. Compelling, go talk to clinicians. The clinicians are having to make excruciating decisions around this.
Matt, it's such an important point, focusing on particularly patients and the clinicians who are, the focal point of all of this effort that we're, really trying to move the needle for as an industry, and reminding ourselves that these aren't just numbers. These are people, and we're impacting massively the people's lives who we can help. As you mentioned, up 50% year over year, which will treat 50% more patients. Something on the order of 7,000 last year will be close to 10,000 this year. And that's a great outcome. But there's so many more left out there who can't get treatment. And that's where we should focus our attention. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. And sorry I kept you a little bit over an hour, but I really appreciate your insights, and it's great to catch up.